What is your journey, especially around the brain cancer and around just writing your own story around it?
I kind of feel like maybe when you break out a small town, you kind of go through a lot of bumps in the road, right? Like you kind of earn your stripes, so to speak, and we all have these like bumps that we have to kind of go through. But mine started July 12th of 2021. I had a seizure and didn't know I had a seizure. My wife knew something was up and took me to urgent care, sent me to the emergency room where they did a CT scan, said there was a shadow, which that was the only thing I was told. And I was going to wait for a bed to open up, which is really confusing when you don't know what a shadow is, because you're thinking a shadow like in a traditional sense, right? And then fast forward just a little bit, which ended up being 2 days of sitting in emergency room waiting for MRI, and then MRI, and they find a tumor in my brain, but don't bother to tell me it's a tumor, right? Like it's just like somebody we interviewed it, and within it seemed like forever. Somebody came in and told us it was pretty sure had to have been maybe like a first year med student or somebody just kind of doing rounds and just kind of briefly said, "Has somebody told you what? Have they read your results?" And said no, and they're like, "Oh, it looks like a high grade glioma," and kind of just walked away and said somebody will be in to talk to you in a couple hours or a few minutes or whatever. And after a while, like doctor Googled it, and it's not a good thing. High grade glioma is not a good thing. But kind of fast forward a little bit, I had a really good surgeon, and took longer than normal to get back the diagnosis because the doctors or the I shouldn't say just doctors, it was institutions couldn't agree on what it was. And then I finally did go in to get the diagnosis from what would have been my first oncologist. And the results were not good. They got the results in front of me. I always like to say that they did a bad job is kind of like giving an ultimate compliment. It was beyond bad the way that the news was said to me. They immediately was pretty much like you're going to be dead in 7 months, kind of like you alluded to, like plan the end. It's all this stuff like this, but the part that this doctor didn't take in consideration is the person. They didn't know who they were talking to, or to even ask better questions. Like maybe like, well, can we question his results? Can we look at it? Never thought once like this was sent to 4 different places. Why was that sent to 4 different places? Could we dig a little further or whatever? They just accepted it. And how I like to say it is that they were writing my ending while I was writing my beginning. And little did they know I've been telling stories my whole life. And I know so much could happen from in the, once upon a time in the end. And while I let myself feel all of those emotions, which I'm happy to talk about all those things, I never once believed that this was true of me. The doctors are experts in what they did. I have no doubt about it that they were an expert in their field, but they weren't an expert in me. And that was the missing chunk, at least from my end. Coming from a small town, when you want to do big things, like a lot of times you're on your own. And I think that that's what I turned back on. All of the things that I'm sure we're going to discuss that when I was a kid going through, I looked at as being what made me, what was wrong about my life actually turned into be the things that saved my life, which is always pretty interesting too when you have the beauty of hindsight.